The stories presented in this video are real, but we have changed the characters' names and altered images to protect their identities. The creator of this video is not an investigative officer. These narratives have been sourced from various internet platforms. Our intent is not to accuse or target anyone in particular. Thank you for understanding.
Welcome to True Crime Stories Hub. Today in this true crime documentary, we will discuss another marriage betrayal story. Imagine a touching story about a happy and hopeful family reunion. However, what if this beautiful situation took a sinister and perverse turn? This example serves as a terrifying reminder that the most unsettling partnerships can actually be the most innocent-looking ones. Introducing Stephen and Katie, a father and daughter whose lives have been entwined by chance and fate. Unknown to the outside world, this peculiar familial bond will eventually become the focus of a tragic tale. A seemingly normal tale of a family reunion would quickly take a terrifying turn. Their fates would be permanently changed by the unanticipated turns of their lives, which would have unanticipated effects. For the Plattel family, an apparently typical day on April 12, 2018, became a nightmare. A terrible chain of events revolved around father and daughter Stephen and Katie Plattel. Things that would alter not just their lives, but also the lives of everyone in their immediate vicinity for all time. Beneath the surface of their perfectly normal lives, Stephen and Katie had developed a clandestine romance. How a dangerous family secret could remain undiscovered. When it finally surfaced, it caused everyone to reevaluate the fundamentals of the purest human connections. They realized that this was the wrong course of action, and in complete contrast to their expectations, their actions had disastrous results. The impacted person would experience a sequence of circumstances that would ultimately be tragic. Come explore the terrifying story of Stephen and Katie Plattel with us. Stephen Plattel was raised in New York in a somewhat typical household. Although not much is known about his early years or adolescence, his life took a negative turn in his early 20s. Stephen, then 20 years old, met 15-year-old Alyssa Garcia online in 1995. Despite the age difference, they instantly created a friendship and had an immediate connection. Stephen was attracted to Alyssa despite her youth, and their relationship developed into a covert romance. Stephen's attentiveness and charms captivated Alyssa, a sophomore in high school. Despite her innocence, she was unable to recognize the deceptive methods he was using to shape her. Alyssa's family and acquaintances were not aware of the relationship, which Stephen carefully fostered. He traveled all the way from New York to Texas to meet her because he was so consumed by his desires. As the intensity of their romance increased, Alyssa fled her home to live with Stephen in New York. Blinded by her love for him, she severed her connections with her friends and family. When Alyssa became pregnant at the age of 16, she and Stephen began dating, and the result was Katie, born Denise Plattel in 1998. Katie witnessed personally the violence and neglect she endured at the hands of her father when she was a small child. As soon as she was born in 1998, it became clear that Stephen had troubling characteristics that would portend the violence that would follow. Denise's mother, Alyssa, claims that Stephen's abusive tendencies became apparent almost quickly. Alyssa described horrific incidents involving Stephen's abuse of their baby girl. When she cried, he would cover her lips, for example. She became black and blue as he pinched her all over. The torture got so bad that Stephen, unable to handle Denise's screams, put her in an ice chest or cooler to keep her quiet. He would occasionally keep a crack open by leaving a blanket slightly open, but other times he would totally close it, making Alyssa wait outside. Alyssa would discover Denise, covered in bruises and drenched in sweat, gasping for air when she was finally permitted to open it. Alyssa tragically decided to put her daughter up for adoption after realizing the threat Stephen posed to Katie. She was aware that it was the only way to protect Katie and provide her with a better life. She desired for her daughter to grow up in a loving and secure environment, two things that were conspicuously lacking in her household with Stephen. Alyssa felt that giving up her parental rights was the wisest course of action because her concerns for Denise's welfare outweighed her own maternal feelings. The devoted Fusco family adopted Katie, whose name was changed from Denise at the time of adoption. They gave her a secure and nurturing home. Unaware of the sinister secret linking her to her biological parents, she was raised in an environment of love and support. Alyssa and Stephen stayed together in spite of the difficulties and mistreatment. After Stephen relocated to Richmond, Virginia, they were married in 2006. Katie, who is now an adult, became increasingly interested in finding out more about her biological family in 2016. She set out on a quest to locate her birth parents because she was curious and wanted answers. She kept in touch with her birth mother, Alyssa, via social media. Eager and nervous at the same time, Katie messaged Alyssa to let her know she wanted to get in touch. After years of looking for Katie, Alyssa was ecstatic to get her message. Following months of communicating virtually, Katie made the decision to travel to North Carolina to see Alyssa. The reunion was a happy and unsure time that was yet melancholy. When Katie first met her biological mother, they clicked right away. After the reunion, Katie made the difficult choice to move to North Carolina to live with her birth family and take a year off from college. Her adoptive parents had conflicting feelings about her choice. While they were supportive, they were also worried about the difficulties she may encounter. The living arrangements in the household dampened Alyssa's enthusiasm. Alyssa occupied the bedroom, and Katie's biological father, Stephen, slept on the couch. Although Katie had a room of her own, she mostly hung out with Stephen and her two younger sisters. Stephen and Alyssa were already living apart and sharing rooms when Katie made the decision to move in with her birth family in August 2016. Unaware of her father's history, Katie grew close to him quite fast. She was at home with him and her two younger sisters most of the time. Having her firstborn child, Alyssa was thrilled to have Katie live with him. She quickly became aware of some alarming behavioral shifts in Stephen, though. In an apparent attempt to appear younger and more like Katie, he started dressed differently, wearing tight clothing and growing out his hair. Alyssa was really disturbed when she found out 6 weeks after Katie had moved in that Stephen had moved from the couch to the floor of her bedroom. Reminding him of his violent past, Alyssa addressed Stephen about his inappropriate behavior and advised Katie to exercise caution around him. But Katie dismissed her worries, thinking she could trust Stephen because he had changed. This answer demonstrated how much Katie had already been influenced and conditioned by her father. When Alyssa saw how much Katie resembled her younger self physically, her uneasiness increased. She eventually found it impossible to ignore the unsettling relationship between Stephen and Katie. After a furious confrontation that culminated with Stephen and Katie storming out of the house together, she approached them both. 3 months later, in November 2016, Alyssa found the strength to file for divorce from Stephen, taking her 2 girls with her. Because of this choice, Stephen and Katie were left alone in the house, unhindered as they pursued their perverted desires. While cleaning her daughter's room, who was 11 years old, in May 2017, Alyssa made a startling find. According to the girl's notebook, Katie was pregnant with Stephen's child. They had a sexual relationship, and the 2 kids had been instructed to call Katie their stepmother. According to the journal post, Alyssa approached Stephen right away, and he verified the relationship and Katie's pregnancy. She reported the incestuous relationship to the police after being appalled. Stephen told Alyssa that he had been deeply in love with Katie and that the fact that they were biologically related had not affected his feelings for her. Stephen and Katie remained together in spite of the pending police inquiry. They lied about their relationship on their marriage certificates after getting married on July 20th, 2017, and parking in Maryland. Both Katie's adoptive parents and Stephen's mother attended the wedding. They knew what was going on but felt unable to stop it. Bennett Kieran Plattel, Katie and Stephen's son, was born in September 2017. In search of a new beginning, the couple relocated to a home in Knightdale, North Carolina. Their joy, however, was fleeting. Stephen and Katie were taken into custody and accused of incest in January 2018. They were released on bond despite their charges, but they were instructed not to communicate with one another. Stephen's mother was given custody of Bennett, and Katie returned to live with her adoptive parents, Tony and Kelly Fusco. She called Stephen and told him that she didn't want to keep dating him. Following their release on bond, a court injunction forbade Stephen and Katie from communicating with one another. While Stephen was residing in a motel room in Virginia due to his North Carolina ban, Katie was forced to return to New York as a result of this separation. But on March 16, 2018, the limitations were removed, and Stephen was able to go back to his North Carolina house, which was conveniently close to his mother, Grace, who were in care of Bennett, their son. As the days went by, Stephen and Katie were both feeling the emotional toll of their predicament. A turning point was reached on April 12, 2018, when Katie called Stephen to let him know she had decided to break up with him. She said she wanted a divorce since the relationship had gotten poisonous and was negatively affecting her health. Katie expressed her desire to take back her life, follow her passions for digital advertising and art, which she intended to study in college, and in the end, escape the toxic relationship that had trapped her. This choice marked a major turning point in Katie's life since it gave her the opportunity to consider the seriousness of their predicament while she was separated from Stephen. She started to see how their relationship had been characterized by control and manipulation. Stephen, though, was not amused by the news. Feeling deceived and abandoned, he erupted in a fit of rage at Katie's declaration. This emotional upheaval sparked Stephen's hazardous drive for vengeance, as he wanted to get revenge on Katie for what he believed to be her desertion. Anger, jealousy, and a desperate need to maintain control were the main drivers of Stephen's following behavior. He appeared to be prone to severe emotional reactions based on his history of violent outbursts and erratic behavior. There was a visceral reaction to the idea of losing Katie, whom he had cultivated and controlled. He saw Katie's departure from him as more than a simple rejection. He felt obliged to exact revenge for a personal insult. The psychology of retaliation was a major influence on Stephen's thinking. According to research, people who act out of jealousy or rage frequently commit retaliatory aggression because they feel compelled to reestablish the perceived balance of power. The idea of Katie moving on without him was unbearable to Stephen. He probably thought that by going to extreme lengths, he could regain control and get rid of the thing that was hurting him. The terrible chain of events started at around 7 p.m. on the evening of April 11, 2018, when Stephen Plattel called his mother Grace in a fit of wrath and desperation after his daughter Katie told him she had decided to break off their incestuous relationship. In order to have Katie look after his 7-month-old son Bennett while both parents await trial for their incest charges, he informed her that he was en route to pick him up and go to New York City. However, when Stephen's emotional condition worsened, this plan swiftly fell apart. Rather than bringing Bennett to visit Katie, Stephen went back to his house in Knightdale, North Carolina, and killed his own child, an unimaginable deed. Although Bennett's status as a juvenile prevents the public from knowing the specifics of his death, reports imply that he died from asphyxiation with compression of the torso, indicating a cruel and intentional act. Stephen's decision to hide his body in a closet after murdering Bennett is a horrifying testament to his state of mind and the seriousness of his deed. The terrible things that happened on the night of April 11th were just the start. Stephen Plattel was so angry and depressed that he was unable to accept Katie's choice. Driven by the same hunger and need for vengeance, he drove 600 miles from North Carolina to New York after brutally killing their 7-month-old son, Bennett, in a filicide. He parked his blue minivan in the lot of a local liquor store across the street and drove to the house of Katie's adoptive parents, Anthony and Kelly Fusco. He then waited for the family to depart for their regular visit to Katie's grandmother's home in Waterbury, Connecticut, while stalking them patiently. Stephen's persistence paid off on the morning of April 12th. As expected, Katie and Anthony Fusco, her adoptive father, came out of their house, eager to start the day. Unaware of the threat that was only a short distance away, they got into their Toyota pickup truck. Stephen's vehicle trailed closely after. His thoughts were filled with anger and treachery. The truck stopped at a red light as they got closer to an intersection. Stephen took advantage of the situation at that precise moment. He drew up next to their car, rolled down his window, and displayed a rifle of the arrow assault variety. Later, witnesses described the terrifying scene in which they saw Stephen shoot the truck, sending a volley of bullets into the cabin. As Stephen emptied his rifle into the truck, the sound of gunfire reverberated across the silent streets of New Milford, Connecticut. After being hit repeatedly in the head and torso, Katie and Anthony's lives were abruptly taken. When an off-duty firefighter happened to be nearby and saw the massacre taking place, he promptly called 911 to report the shooting. The firefighter detailed the scenario in a desperate call to dispatchers, saying, "Someone just passed by shooting this guy in the truck." As he gave information about the vehicles involved, including a blue minivan with South Carolina license plates, the urgency in his voice underlined the seriousness of the issue. The remains of 20-year-old Katie Plattel and her 56-year-old adoptive father, Anthony Fusco, were still belted in their seats when the police arrived on the scene. Both had been quickly slaughtered by Stephen's unbridled fury. Law enforcement started the inquiry right away by looking for the car that had left the site. Grace, Stephen's mother, was in a panic at the same time. She contacted 911 after Stephen confessed to her about the killings, exposing the horrifying details of her son's behavior. After Stephen drove away from the scene of the double murder, the police moved swiftly to find him. Law enforcement started piecing together the sequence of events after witnesses described the blue minivan. As investigators became more aware of the magnitude of the tragedy that had occurred, the search grew more intense. Stephen Plattel ran away in a state of distress after killing his own daughter, Katie Plattel, and her adoptive father, Anthony Fusco, in a horrifying double murder. He felt the rush of adrenaline from the shooting, but it was soon overtaken by the terrifying knowledge of what he had done. He was overcome with anger, hopelessness, and remorse as he drove out of the junction in New Milford, Connecticut. Following the killings, Stephen made the disastrous choice to phone his mother, Grace. He told her about the unimaginable things he had just done in a tense and tearful talk. He murdered his spouse. Her father was murdered by him. She informed the operator, her voice shaking with terror and astonishment, "And I can't even believe this is happening." As a terrible reminder of the violence that had occurred, Grace described how Stephen abandoned Bennett dead at home. As he recounted the killings and the terrible end of their baby boy, Bennett, whom he had also slain earlier that day, Stephen's confession exposed the depth of his anguish. Following the phone call, Stephen parked his minivan in a remote location in Dover, New York. His actions weighed hard on him, and as the truth of his predicament dawned on him, He came to the conclusion that there was no way out of the repercussions of his violent outburst. Stephen seized a gun and killed himself in a last desperate act. The tragic end to a chain of events that had gotten out of hand, leaving a path of destruction and heartache, was the self-inflicted gunshot wound. The town was left to deal with the fallout from the violence, lamenting the deaths of Bennett, Anthony, and Katie, and considering the terrible events that resulted in such a terrible conclusion. The investigation into the killings of Katie Plattel and Anthony Fusco, as well as the passing of their young boy Bennett, proceeded swiftly after the tragic events on April 12, 2018. The New Milford Police Department and the Knightdale Police Department collaborated to put together the case's horrific elements. After Stephen Plattel's mother, Grace, voiced worry about the remarks he made in a phone call at approximately 8:45 a.m., the inquiry started with a welfare check at his home in Knightdale, North Carolina. On the same day, Bennett Plattel was 7 months old when the cops came at the house and found his lifeless body stashed in a closet. Because of the dire circumstances surrounding his death, authorities suspected foul play right away. At the same time, Katie and her adoptive father, Anthony, were discovered dead in their car when police in New Milford reacted to reports of a shooting at an intersection. According to witnesses, Stephen opened fire with an AR-15 style weapon, hitting both victims several times as his blue minivan pulled up next to the pickup truck. The awful events that had occurred were clearly depicted by the evidence gathered from both crime scenes, including witness testimony and ballistic analysis. No further legal action was taken against Stephen Plattel, who had died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. The investigation did, however, uncover the nuanced history of the family dynamics that gave rise to these killings. Early in January 2018, Stephen and Katie were taken into custody on suspicion of incest, adultery, and aiding and abetting a minor's misbehavior. Both had been freed on bail, but they were not allowed to speak to one another. The court's decision to grant Stephen access to Bennett infuriated and frustrated Alyssa Plattel, Stephen's ex-wife and Katie's birth mother. If someone is brought up on charges of incest, they should never be allowed near minor children, she said, expressing her belief that the system had failed to safeguard the child. Alyssa also blasted the fact that Stephen had not received a psychiatric evaluation before to his release, emphasizing the necessity of mental health evaluations in situations involving such serious accusations. The case's legal complexity became clear as the investigation progressed. The case was unprecedented, according to Rick Friedman, Stephen's defense lawyer. It presented particular difficulties for the legal system. He refuted allegations that Katie had been brainwashed or coerced by her father, arguing that Stephen and Katie's relationship was voluntary. Even though there was no trial, the information acquired during the inquiry pointed to a pattern of manipulation and control that had marked Stephen's interactions with both Katie and Alyssa. Numerous lives were lost, and a community was left in shock as a result of the sad conclusion brought forth by these dynamics. There was no trial, no verdict, and no sentencing because Stephen Plattel had passed away. At the case's conclusion, it was tragically revealed that the judicial system had failed to stop the terrible atrocities that had taken place. Despite her own struggles with grief and remorse, Alyssa Plattel persisted in raising awareness of domestic abuse and the intricacies of family assault. In an effort to stop such tragedies in the future, she stresses how crucial it is to spot the warning signals of control and manipulation in relationships. The case's aftermath is a sobering reminder of the terrible outcomes that can result from unrestrained familial ties and the urgent need for caution in ensuring the safety of those who are more susceptible. On news sites and social media, the Stephen and Katie Plattel affair sparked a wave of shock and indignation. Many questioned how such manipulation and abuse could develop to such violence, expressing shock at the sad circumstances that led to the killings and subsequent suicide. Considering the obvious indications of abuse, Commenters attacked the justice system for failing to safeguard the innocent. Katie's birth mother, Alyssa Plattel, became a spokesperson for the victims, bemoaning the structural shortcomings that made this tragedy possible. Decisions regarding the necessity of improved mental health assessments and safeguards for susceptible people were spurred by the case. An episode of the real crime series Sex, Lies, and Murder called Murders in the Family focused on the unsettling case of Stephen and Katie Plattel. This episode examined the intricate complexities of their incestuous relationship and the catastrophic results of Stephen's manipulative actions and violent background. The episode explores the victim's inner distress and the systemic flaws that allowed the abuse to worsen through spooky reenactments and interviews. Regretfully, it acts as a chilling reminder of the terrible results of unbridled manipulation and domestic abuse.